Now, first of all, SRITA, Stanford Research into the Impact of Tobacco Advertising, is my research group. And really, we do several things. We provide resources for scholars, for government regulators, for advocates, and also for various nonprofit organizations. We provide a huge amount of material, actually. Almost every single day we have requests to use material in various and sundry ways. And of course, we conduct our own research. We have a number of publications every year having to do with tobacco advertising. Now, it may not surprise anyone in this room that I receive no compensation from any tobacco industry or tobacco-related. They're not too terribly pleased to see this history and present-day practice brought to the forefront. So the core of SRITA is a collection of what has now grown to between 40 and 50,000 original tobacco, anti-smoking, and e-cigarette advertising. The original ads, and we ship every other year, are at the National Museum of American History at the Smithsonian. We have a close relationship with the Smithsonian on this project. Our website, tobacco.stanford.edu, has a number of different features about it. And within it, and many of you have seen this before, there are a large number, something on the order of 18,000, tobacco advertisements that have been analyzed and put up in various categories and themes. Each individual ad has metadata and also commentary about the campaign that it's part of. Electronic cigarettes, as you know, are exploding. And this database, since the last time I spoke, went from a rather modest database to something on the order of 12 or 13,000 individual images. We're continuously updating it about e-cigarette advertising. They've been remarkably creative and diverse in their advertising. Anti-smoking advertising, by comparison, is very simplistic. The tobacco industry has the very best product managers, the very best artists and copywriters that money can buy. Whereas the anti-smoking folks are often, a government bureaucrat that's given a small budget, and we all saw the black lungs when we were teenagers, and it just didn't help very much. One of the important things about SRITA is that we don't study the history of tobacco advertising. What we really study is the behavior of the tobacco industry today. And we use what they've done in the past to illuminate what they're doing today. And while the industry professes to be much more socially responsible today than they were 50 or 60 years ago when doctors were in ads pushing cigarettes, in fact, they're doing exactly the same things now that they were doing in 1930s and 40s. We have a large number of tobacco advertisements and SRITA original videos, include all sorts of fun videos put together by our summer intern program about various parts of tobacco marketing. We have a FileMaker database that underlies the images and the text, and it's all fully searchable from the various databases as depicted here. Now, the Google Analytics, as of a week ago, we've, in the last 4 years, had 378,000 roughly unique users to the SRITA database. So it's being heavily used all around the world to study tobacco advertising. One thing that's increasingly evident when you look at e-cigarette ads is that they're advertising companies getting inspiration from the tobacco ads to make e-cig ads. You can't stop it, right? That's what's happening. We've created now a whole consortium called the Stanford Tobacco Research Collaborative. And there are a group of researchers at Stanford that actually have biannual retreats in this room with about as many people as we have here that include quite a few people doing tobacco and tobacco-related research. But probably the closest one to us is Bonnie Halpern-Felcher in pediatrics. We do, if you will, content analysis of ads. So if you think about studying an advertisement, one way is you look at it and say, I'm an expert and I read what it says and looks like, and it must mean this. Another thing is to show it to a group of consumers. So Bonnie does consumer perception research where she might show advertising material to 14-year-olds and 16-year-olds who see it very differently. One of the reasons we have a summer internship program is because the way any of us in this room see an ad is very different than the way a teen will see an ad or a Stanford undergrad. This summer you'll find we have, I think, 6 or 8, they're all Stanford students now, either graduate students. We have one graduate student coming this summer who actually is doing film and plans to do documentary film on tobacco advertising or some segment of it. We have people from around the world, actually. One of the themes we have now is Global Village. So we're looking, one of our summer interns speaks Tagalog, is from the Philippines, is a Stanford undergrad. Another one is, come on in guys, we can get some seats for you. Another one is actually grew up in Afghanistan, and she's going to be studying Pashtun, Urdu, and Farsi tobacco advertising, which is a new one for us people. So there's a lot going on in California and nationally in tobacco. Many of you know, I mean, literally May 5th, that the Governor Brown signed a package of tobacco bills. Most importantly, the age to buy tobacco products in California has gone from 18 to 21. Oh, and by the way, electronic cigarettes, which heretofore were completely unregulated, in theory you could sell them to a 5-year-old, are going to be considered exactly the same way tobacco products are in terms of place of use, in parks or in public buildings, etc. So it's a very major improvement. There is a California ballot initiative, and that initiative, Tom Steyer, who is a trustee of this university, put $1 million up to put a ballot initiative up this coming November's election, which I think a lot of people will turn out for, I have a feeling, although some may stay home, I understand. But the purpose of this is everyone thinks California is this great anti-tobacco state. It's not. In fact, we have very low-cost cigarettes. We're sort of in the 36th in the nation. Maybe they're $4 to $5 per pack here. New York City, they're 15. Why is that important? Kids can't afford it. And you can't afford to buy them regularly, don't get addicted on the nicotine. Now there was, believe it or not, in 2012, another big initiative called Prop 29. And in fact, it went down to defeat by a razor-thin margin. And you can see that almost $47 million was put in by Philip Morris, R.J. Reynolds, U.S. Smokeless Tobacco, to put it down. And that just shows you that people were more convinced by their bogus advertising than they were to trust me. Because that actually went to, that postcard actually went to every voter's house in California. I do not take this result as a vote of confidence. So many of you saw all over the newspapers and media, again, just a few days ago, literally the same day I was going to the podium at Dana-Farber, I was scrambling at 11 o'clock for the 12 o'clock thing to put in this. So I was actually, 2 years ago, I was at the FDA giving a talk on tobacco advertising regulation, the day the deeming regulations actually were put out, and it were as a draft. It took over 2 years. The process took 5 years before the FDA actually put out e-cigarette regulations. And what this is that in 2009, the FDA was enfranchised to oversee tobacco products, but only cigarettes. And what happened is that it took a few years before they could deem within their purview of authority cigars, pipes, e-cigarettes, etc. So now e-cigarettes, and there's a first round of regulations that have just come in that are actually very important. I just wrote a blog that was published by Stanford, some of you may have seen. Now, I'm going to share with you just for fun, it's something that comes from how deep our collection is. I was going to the Dana-Farber, and those of you know about the Jimmy Fund, how many of you know about the Jimmy Fund, right? So the Jimmy Fund is a philanthropic organization to support Dana-Farber Cancer Institute based on a boy with leukemia in the late 50s who was cured, named Jimmy. And it is a Red Sox and Jimmy Fund. So you go to the Jimmy Fund Auditorium, and it's all baseballs and banners in the back for the Red Sox in this auditorium in the Cancer Center. So I figured I had to come and talk about the Red Sox. So it turns out, in the 19th century, before the Red Sox, which were formed in 1901, were the Red Stockings. I couldn't make this up. And in fact, Red Stockings baseball team had their very own cigar. And these are Red Stockings cigar advertisements. Now, in 1915, when Babe Ruth, perhaps the most famous baseball player of all time, was there was a team picture, and they won the World Series this year. And you can see for Fatima cigarettes. Now, many of you know about baseball cards with chewing gum. But in fact, baseball cards began with tobacco. Because if you put cigarettes in the early part of the 20th century into a package, they get crushed. So you need a stiffener. So they started putting things, scantily clad ladies, the pictures of states, and famous athletes. So these are from the early part of the 20th century. These three are various Red Sox stars of the time that came out of cigarette boxes. Many of you know the most rare and expensive tobacco, the baseball card is Honus Wagner. So Honus Wagner, these cards were made in cigarettes, and he objected morally because of religious basis to that. And so they had to pull them all off the market with his card. That's why it was so rare. Now, through the 1980s, the outfields in almost all of the baseball parks in America were tobacco billboards. Now, these are some ads from our collection from 1933. You can see that 21 out of 23 of the world champion Giants smoked Camels. Now, that may seem odd. That's 1933. And here you are in 1934, where 21 of the 23 St. Louis Cardinals. Talks about the aerobic motion of baseball, perhaps. But don't kid yourself, because basketball players, hockey players, you name it, were all endorsing tobacco at that time. And here you see that Camels don't get your wind. And this is, again, 19 out of 22 Tigers, and this is 1935. And notice this rather comely Miss World Series with her butt. Now, of course, if you talk about Boston baseball, for those who lived in Boston, you have to realize they hate the Yankees, right? So this is Joe DiMaggio, another very famous guy from San Francisco, married in San Francisco City Hall, hawking Camels and hawking Chesterfield. Mickey Mantle, who was a hero in my youth, Viceroy and Camels. And here he is standing in front of his New York Yankees locker with the Viceroy box on the back. And in fact, Mickey Mantle Jr., his son, appeared with Dad in a Phillies cigar ad. So you can see that these baseball players are being involved with multiple tobacco companies. Even Babe Ruth, you can see not a cough and a carload. These are health themes. Why? Because if the public is worried about smoking, and they were calling smokers cough, they were calling cigarettes coffin nails as early as 1900, 1910. There's nothing natural about drawing smoke into your lungs and exhaling. It makes people cough, it's irritating. So that they would use athletes as a way of reassuring the public. And so you see here, Babe Ruth, medical science says proof positive, less throat irritants. And we all know he died of head and neck cancer. Now, when it comes to the Jimmy Fund, this is the statue outside of Fenway Park. This is Ted Williams, who was the Boston hero in the Hall of Fame in 1966. And Jimmy, that's a statue that's there today. Well, good old Ted, as a young guy, was hawking Chesterfields, was a bit older 10 years later, was Lucky Strike. And here's the sports announcer of the Boston Red Sox, and this 15-year-old guy is out there hawking them in the stands. Now, we have many, many hundreds of Sunday newspaper ads, and this Red Sox ad says that the umpire is a much better umpire since he switched to Philip Morris, presumably because he didn't have something called cigarette hangover, whatever the heck that is. All right? They handed out in the 1980s, Marlboro handed out Red Sox schedules to fans, but the true story is this. Now, I know Willie Mays. And I was talking with him. I don't know if I've shared this story with some of you. Some of you may have been there with me. But I said, do you remember that you were in tobacco ads? And he says, I remember that very well. I was in a Territon ad. I said, Territon? Well, I looked it up, found it. Yes, he was. He was also in Chesterfield. And I gave a copy of this to him, nicely printed out. And I said a couple things. I said, well, which brand did you smoke, Territon or Chesterfield? He says, I never smoked. My dad would have whooped me if I smoked. So he was never a smoker at all. And I said, well, what about the money? What money? The money went to the owner of the Giants. I didn't see a penny. So it's an interesting story. And it's a very different time where it all went. Now, baseball ads, themed tobacco ads continue today. And I want to talk, because we're otolaryngologists, about chewing tobacco. Obviously, this is very much tied up with baseball even today. Here you can see a Red Sox star in the 1970s. Actually didn't retire till the 90s and Hall of Fame in 2000, catcher Carlton Fisk.
Hey, I'm Carlton Fisk, and just about the only relaxation I get during these workouts is from my Copenhagen. That's smokeless tobacco. Copenhagen gives me full natural tobacco flavor without lighting up. Just a pinch between my cheek and gum, and I'm free to swing, run, slide, jump, catch, throw, sweat, win.
There you go. Yeah. And in New York, they would give away whoopee cushions with, hawking chewing tobacco. And here you can see some chewing tobacco ads, typically baseball themed, as you can see. And I always get a kick out of this because this guy, supposedly by chewing skull, not only gets one pretty girl, but two. And if you really think about what it means to chew tobacco, that's a pretty far-fetched notion. Now, the big issue about all of this chewing tobacco thing is that young people want to emulate their stars, their baseball stars, right? And so I love this picture of them peeking through the outfield fence. And so, the problem is you get these guys having Red Man, and kids pick it up as well. In fact, they even have a bubble gum called Big League Chew. Some of you may have seen this. And Vasu's nodding. I had that as a kid with my name on it, right? You get it personalized. And their slogan is, you're in the big leagues when you have Big League Chew. So you talk about acclimatizing this. When Jim Harbaugh was the football coach here, he chewed tobacco, which is an NCAA violation. And a number of the players picked it up at that time. And here you can see a young guy getting started. This phrase, get him young and train him right, comes right out of tobacco industry documents about how to engage high school kids. This was in the 50s, even as late as 1960s. As a matter of fact, for those of you interested, we'll back up for a second, is that we have a huge baseball collection for anybody who's a rabid baseball fan, and the story, many of these stories have never been told. And the oral tobacco story we've come across is in the 1980s that smokeless tobacco companies hired college student ambassadors to go out and hand out free things. They would hire athletes to do that. This is 1980s, not so long ago, really. And we have all the documentation directly from the tobacco database where you can see what their plan was and how they executed it. So many of the athletes dying today of oral cancer from chewing tobacco, they were accosted when they were in school and handed out free samples. And we have a lot of primary documentation of this. So as many of you know, Tony Gwynn died of oral cancer. It was actually a salivary cancer. And you can see Kurt Schilling of the Boston Red Sox just recently said he has oral cancer. So San Francisco led the way in just this year, banning all tobacco, so it's tobacco-free now at AT&T Park. New York followed suit, LA, and as of opening day in April, so did the Boston Red Sox, are now completely tobacco-free. Not surprisingly, the topic of today's talk, e-cigarettes. The e-cigarette companies are now picking up on tobacco advertising as well. These are Enjoy ads from this year. So a little bit about electronic cigarettes. They were first introduced in America in 2007, having been invented in 2004 in China. When we say electronic cigarettes, we really mean a family of different devices from what we call cig-alikes, about the size and shape of a cigarette, on through what are very popular now, advanced personal vaporizers, and even big hoses, e-hookah. And so some of them look like cigarettes, and some of them are kind of distinctive. There are a wide variety now of these big vaporizers, often called tank systems, because you can refill them yourself. And they come in an enormous variety. Anybody see the reference here? Shout it out. R2D2. R2D2. Very good. But I put this one in. Well, you're going to really laugh when you say that. Ed Ambrose. Ed, are you here? Yeah. Well, Ed has one of these in his office, right?
Not the vaporizer.
It's a T-code, not a vaporizer. This is, what's the reference here, I understand, is Doctor Who, right? Okay. That's right. All right. And there are e-cigars and e-pipes, even pink e-pipes, if you can believe it. There are big, hookahs, hoses, and there are even asthma inhalers that are actually vapor nicotine, so that you can be in the back of your classroom and the teacher's going to think you're puffing your asthma and you're really getting your fix of nicotine, right? Now, some of these are fixed battery disposable, but most of them are rechargeable, and they often come with cartridge systems. Think about like a Hewlett-Packard printer. They try to get a cartridge that is not, you can't switch over from another brand. So they're big systems. They often have Bluetooth connectivity. They plug into USB. No kidding. They basically have, a cartridge with liquid, a high-powered battery, which sometimes explodes, and an atomizer. And when you suck on it, you get vapor, and they helpfully light up on the end to emulate a cigarette. So they're made in China. These are actually e-cigarette companies that love to show their manufacturing places. But often you'll see that the brands, this is all out of one given factory line, but they just stamp different brand names. So relatively few designs exist of these, but there are many different brands. As a matter of fact, I was thinking to order a Capasso brand, and you can actually get Capasso e-cigarettes that will come out, right, Robson?
Yep.
Be good for your sleep patients. So we actually designed a Stanford e-cigarette brand with the help of Photoshop. We didn't actually buy it. So, you have to realize that the issue of electronic cigarettes is actually very controversial, even amongst the public health community and physicians. Some say that it's a dangerous gateway which can lead young people to nicotine addiction. Other people say it's a promising cessation device for the 2-pack-a-day Marlboro smoker. Some say that it's renormalizing the act of smoking and making it popular again and acceptable socially. Others say that it's part of a tobacco endgame strategy. Now, let me give you some of that. But first of all, some of the brands, there are over 500 brands on the market today, but the market is rapidly shifting. And the reason it's shifting is the big boys came in 2014 with R.J. Reynolds with Vuse, now the #1 seller, and Mark 10 for Philip Morris. Why did Vuse take over? Because the big boys control the shelf space in every 7-Eleven, gas station, Safeway, wherever they sell cigarettes, they have the space and they can actually put them there so that they're selling. So over 80% of the US cigarette market, e-cigarette market, is now controlled by the major companies, which is a profound difference and in many ways very concerning. So, just like Coca-Cola owns obesity and slimness, the cigarette companies are trying to own cancer and theoretically anti-cancer. The problem, of course, is that all their profit live in combustibles. So if you look at the products made by the tobacco companies, the e-cigarettes, they actually would be very unsatisfying to the smoker. So they want their Marlboro or Camel smoker to pick up an e-cigarette, try it, and find it unsatisfying. And we'll explain this a little bit more. Now, the tobacco companies, when they advertise e-cigarettes, sometimes actually are really advertising tobacco use, regular combustible cigarettes. So this model is very typical for tobacco advertising. With the woman hugging him while doing the enjoyable thing of playing a piano. But notice where the smoke comes out. So in an e-cigarette, the vapor comes out of this end. In a cigarette, the smoke comes out of that end. So there's many subtle ways they're actually marketing their tobacco products when they're putting these ads in, right? So if you watch the TV ads for e-cigarettes put on by the majors, it's the first time since 1970 you're seeing tobacco companies pushing cigarettes on television and radio because of this. So what's in the liquid? What's in the so-called e-juice? Some systems are open systems that you can refill yourself. Now, the mist that comes out is a mixture of glycerin and propylene glycol with nicotine and a flavoring chemical often within it. Now, no one ever said that breathing in and out glycerin and propylene glycol all day long is a healthy thing for your lungs, right? Just even the base thing, forget about the nicotine, forget about the other chemicals. The industry has said, well, asthma inhalers, asthma inhalers are 2 puffs a day. If you do this 150, 300, 500 times a day, you're coating your lungs with this. Now you might say, well, how do we know if it's toxic? If you study someone smoking, their lungs don't deteriorate for years. In fact, COPD and lung cancer happen after 3 or 4 decades of smoking. So we have all these kids picking this up. We just have no idea whether it's going to give them serious lung disease in the future. So if you look at it, e-cigarettes probably have much less toxins than a combustible product. People smoke for the nicotine, but they die from the smoke. It's the tar that has the carcinogens. And these things, the e-cigarettes have formaldehyde, which is a carcinogen, often have heavy metals and other elements. So one of the things that they love is to show that the vapor products put out a much more impressive plume. And this is a film I took at the alt smoke.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. She looks like my daughter, actually, but she's not, though. So they have contests to see how big a plume you can make. So if you talk about if there's any secondhand smoke, there's secondhand nicotine. There's also vape tricks. You see these? That's I don't know who that would be. I think the faculty member, but there are YouTube videos, thousands of them, showing different kinds of vape tricks. It's become a whole culture. And what about nicotine? So these things have anything from no nicotine to a very high concentration in them. And they certainly can be both a gateway for nicotine addiction, but they can also be a continuity of nicotine addiction. So remember, when we went smoke-free here in Stanford Medicine, I actually got a number of emails from staff members who used to go out to smoke at every break, and they couldn't do it anymore because it was such a long way to go. And they said, thank you. You made it hard for me. I've always wanted to quit, and I finally could quit. You know, if you make it difficult. The other thing is discontinuities of nicotine dosing help smokers to quit. So if you're in a society where you go to an airport, you have to sit in the airport before your flight, you can't smoke. You get in a cross-country airplane, you can't smoke, you wait for your bags, you can't smoke. That lengthy period without nicotine helps you. The problem with e-cigarettes is the place of use. So that, you know, there are places you can vape in a restaurant, you can vape in a sporting place, you can vape even in some airports in America still, until the FAA came down on it just a few weeks ago. So you can keep your nicotine level high, and that's why paradoxically, some smokers actually are less likely to quit using e-cigarettes. So some companies profess their nicotine amount, but you know, there have been a rash of calls to poison centers because these little bottles are very appealing to little kids. And so, you know, that's enough to kill a toddler. The nicotine is very potently toxic. It's a neurotoxin, and it will absorb through your skin, not only if you drink it or breathe it in. In fact, a 30 cc, 36 milligram % bottle like that's enough to kill a whole kindergarten class. Very toxic stuff. Some are zero nicotine, which is intriguing. We'll talk about that later. Now here's an ad for one that has no nicotine, no tar, no tobacco. Do you guys remember this from last time? What do you see here? Anybody want to analyze this, particularly the woman in the wheelchair? What's the meaning of the maker of the advertisement? Let's do content analysis. What do you think? Yeah, what do you see?
Well, I mean, it's obvious. I mean, is it trying to get rid of, allude to there won't be future or health benefits?
Yeah, so she looks healthy, right?
Yeah.
I suppose, yeah. Anything else? So the wheelchair is red, same color as the nose. So you won't end up with the wheelchair, right? Anybody notice, this is, you know, you have to look at tobacco ads a lot. Do you ever notice that her legs spell N and this spells O? So what the industry, the e-cig industry is trying to do is to normalize nicotine addiction by saying that it's equivalent to caffeine addiction, a benign addiction that doesn't really hurt you. And the truth is, nicotine itself is probably not all that toxic in and of itself. On the other hand, it is extremely habit-forming. You've all seen me walking around with coffee. This is tea, I promise you. But you know, but nicotine really does catch people very hard, and especially the adolescent brain. There's something about the adolescent years when if you start on nicotine, you're going to very likely be compelled to use it. Now, it may not surprise you that e-cigarettes are very prevalent in the marijuana world. And THC products were some of the first things used in vapor. And you know, one of the things that people like about it is because it doesn't have that typical hemp smell. So you can be vaping and they won't know whether you're vaping regular e-cigarettes or you're actually using marijuana. They're very enterprising in e-cigarette advertising. Here's a product named DEA. Yeah. So who are the customers? So in adults, 3/4 who pick up e-cigarettes do so out of a desire to completely quit smoking, or at least to cut down. Why does that work better? Well, if you think about it, nicotine patches and gums, they don't reproduce that hand-to-mouth sucking sense that you get with smoking. The other thing is, there's a social identity to the smoker. You go to New York City, there's like a cluster of people below the high-rise all together, chatting away while they smoke. if you stop smoking, you lose your friends. You lose that identity. This allows you to preserve that identity. Now, college kids, however, it's quite different. They really want to try the latest techie thing. They're not so much interested in the desire to quit. They're just experimenting. The US Senate, and we actually contributed many images to this, came out with a thing because they're very worried that e-cigarettes will hook young children. And then if you look in adolescents, if they pick up e-cigarettes, they're very likely to pick up combustible cigarettes later. So it is a gateway, we feel, by and large, and in those smokers amongst teenagers who also use e-cigarettes actually are less likely to quit smoking, right? So what's going on today? Again, getting very current, this just came out less than a month ago. This is the use of tobacco products amongst teenagers in the United States. Notice the rise of e-cigarettes from 2011 to 2015. It is enormously increasing at this rate. Now notice also that the use of traditional combustible cigarettes is declining, and that's actually a very good thing. But if you add these together, the rate of nicotine addiction is marginally up amongst teenagers. Now, one concern that we've had, the prediction was that some of these kids would switch over to being cigarette users. And the fact that it's leveling off, we're concerned it's going to come back up again as a large cohort of teenagers begin using electronic cigarettes. Notice that cigars are down, pipe tobacco are down, hookah is up, has become more popular. And we have a hookah bar right here on University Ave, right? Which is very typical because college campuses are where they are. Now this is middle school students, just to show again, a rise in e-cigarettes and a rise in nicotine addiction amongst 12, 13, 14-year-olds. So e-cigarettes have transgressed every single tobacco regulation that's come up for the last century. So, early on you had weight loss claims, right? Reach for a Lucky instead of a Sweet. If you don't have Luckies, you're going to balloon up like that. Yeah? So what do? The industry escapes the intent of the regulator. Why did Miss Virginia become known as Slim? Because it wanted to scare women that if they stop smoking, they get fat, or if they smoke Virginia Slims, maybe they'll stay slim, right? So the modern ones are now super slims with anorexic models. Unmistakable message to their women targets. And of course, health claims were banned in 1955. You would have doctors like this smoking. And to give you an idea again, I looked at these for several years before I noticed the M and the D were in red. Yeah. And here you've got celebrities like John Wayne, who died of lung cancer. And again, we saw Willie Mays before. That was banned in 1964. All of these things are back with e-cigarettes. Warning labels. Part of the government's action now is to have a nicotine warning label on e-cigarettes going forward. But TV and radio ended in 1971. And you see here the Flintstones. And when I was a boy, you can see here I was in 1965. 6.4 million kids of my age watched the Flintstones. I used to get to stay up until 8 o'clock at night to watch them, I remember. And here's
The Flintstones has been brought to you by Winston, America's best-selling, best-tasting filter cigarette.
Winston tastes good like a cigarette should.
And here I am in Waterville, Maine. And I was not born in the 19th century, but my schoolroom certainly was, right down to the inkwells and everything, yeah. They ripped it down a few years later. So in 1998, they banned many things such as billboards, product placement in movies, sampling, giving things away, cartoon characters, etc. So in this movie, and we have all the original, payments and how much they paid for it and all that is all in the tobacco documents. But Lois Lane, in none of the TV or the comic books or any of them ever smoked. In this movie, she chain smoked through the whole thing. It was banned things that were health descriptors. When someone sees something's a light cigarette, the consumer thinks it means it's more healthful, or mild, it's more healthful. And that's gone away. Sugary cigarettes, flavored cigarettes went away in 2009. All of these things with the FDA. But what happened is, because it was only about cigarettes, is what you saw in 7-Eleven is rows and rows and rows of flavored mini cigars suddenly came on the market. And these are out there, and these are not yet banned, right? And you can see, my favorite is wine grape, because your teenager can break 2 adult taboos with a single act: alcohol and smoking. Now, 80% of e-cigarette brands say that they will help you quit.
You're cheating.
No, I'm not. It's vapor.
Still,
You should try it. Addiction without the consequences.
it's all yours.
So that's the question, is it addiction without the consequences? So how good are e-cigarettes as helping smokers? And this is important to all of us who advise, especially head and neck cancer and laryngology, who advise people. So these are 2 recent meta-analyses. This meta-analysis says there's low quality evidence of a non-statistically significant trend towards smoking cessation in adults using nicotinated e-cigarettes. But there's another review that says they're actually negative associated with quitting because of the dual use phenomenon that we talked about before. So here's probably the best study out there from New Zealand, and you can see that if you look at, this is nicotine e-cigarettes and these are patches. Yes, the e-cigarettes are a little better, but look at how low the number is. Still very few people who pick up e-cigarettes quit. Now, this raises an important question though. In order to satisfy an addicted smoker, you have to get a whole lot of nicotine in all of a sudden. So the tobacco industry has spent billions of dollars figuring out how to freebase nicotine so that when you smoke it, it absorbs it, boom, and they get a throat hit, and it saturates the brain receptors very quickly. The cig-alikes aren't there yet. The chemistry of the e-cigarette liquid is not there yet. But these big vaporizers that put out a lot of plume actually may get there, so that we may see in the future e-cigarettes perfected as a way of helping smokers quit. It's a matter of chemistry, perhaps, over time. The British government, followed by the Royal College of Physicians, again, just April 27th, a few weeks ago, came out recommending that doctors should offer e-cigarettes to smokers. Very controversial, actually, around the public health community at the moment. So when you look at the claims made by e-cigarette makers, and we have a paper we just submitted on cessation claims, looking at Twitter, looking at Facebook, and looking at branded websites. Some of them are explicit. Use this, quit smoking, right? Kiss tobacco goodbye. Some of them show imagery that are unmistakably explicit. This product will help you quit. Others are more implicit. Switch. It doesn't say what dad should switch from or to. It just says switch. Some of them say alternative. Some of them say kick. Here, kick some ash is obvious, but what about something kick? If you're writing regulations for the FDA that make them say, if you're going to assert that your e-cigarette will help a smoker quit, you got to prove it or you can't advertise it. How are you going to stop it? Well, here's some of the problems. You have these, why quit? So these guys would say, don't quit. Well, we didn't tell them to quit, FDA. We said, don't quit, right? Well, in fact, any consumer looking at this understands what it means. Right? How about this? This is brand new, just the last couple of months. It works for me. Doesn't say what it works for me to do. It just works for me. Well, any consumer knows what it's meant to mean. Here's one, Plan A with an X and Plan B. Well, again, it's unmistakable in its meaning, but because of First Amendment in America, you can't have prior restraint on advertising, right? So unless you say that these brands can't advertise at all, they're going to get cessation messages out there to smokers. Because there's no way you can say, you're going to have to submit your ad to a government agency to have consumers look at it and rate it. That's not going to happen in America. It would happen in Europe and in Asia and has, but not here. The other thing is that these websites will say that they're not for smoking cessation, but inside Blue's website, it says it has a blog or testimonials from users or probably from their marketing department saying that, of course, it works. So the tobacco company-owned brands the Views and Mark 10 that were created by the company never give smoking cessation claims. Duh, what a surprise. And that may be where the market is going as the big boys take over. This is the only tobacco ad that we ever came across that said about being a quitter. And he said that, if I ever stopped, my dad would call me a quitter, right? So the message is clearly don't quit. So we haven't seen doctors in tobacco ads for 50 years, but they're back again now. Even otolaryngologists shown up in tobacco ads.
Oh, Silkins, I'm not smoking, I'm vaping. And this isn't a cigarette, it's a vape stick.
I don't understand.
See, the vape stick works by electronically vaporizing liquid. So, there's no smoke involved, only vapor.
So you can enjoy the vape stick anywhere, even in a smoke-free environment.
Right. Now, pass me the forceps and let's see if we can't get this damn thing out of here.
So you have e-health cigarettes with a purported warning that actually says e-cigarettes are good for you. Now, are they safe? No, they're certainly not safe. Are they safer? Yes, they're almost certainly safer. Let's move along here. Some of them say you'll have a long life if you use these. You're real smart if you use them, like Albert Einstein. You have logic cigarettes. More scientists and educators smoke Kent with a micronite filter. George, you were around then. What's the micronite filter made of?
Cellulose.
Anybody? Asbestos. Lung buddy.
Oh boy.
So they love to show lungs in e-cigarette advertisements. This is a smoker's lung, a vapor's lung, and they have very creative ways, even very happy lungs. Breathe freely, a breath of fresh air. O2 e-cigarettes or air e-cigarettes. This is quite disturbing. These are breast cancer electronic cigarettes. Six different brands put out breast cancer e-cigarettes as though it had something to do with it. Save a life, save a lung, save a boob by our e-cigarettes. I couldn't make this up. Some of them rip off the American Cancer Society logo, saying that they're fighting cancer. So what is the truth? Is that there is more and more evidence that e-cigarette, particularly flavored e-cigarettes, cause inflammation. They suppress mucosal immunity, and they can even be oncogenic in certain tests. Beth is studying, along perhaps with some of her colleagues. She's getting a smoking machine like this and going to look in animal model and also in humans at whether e-cigarettes cause inflammation. So thank you. And that will be the first, I think, study of that. You wouldn't think that breathing in vitamin liquid would actually be nutritious, but they nevertheless have it. And here's the VitaSig van. They're giving out free samples of vitamin E cigarettes. No resemblance necessarily to a ice cream van.
Good humor.
Yeah, good humor, thank you. And here it is parked in front of Forever 21 in New York City, giving out free e-cigarettes. They also, remember we talked about cigarettes that make you slim? They're now slimming e-cigarettes. And a good example, if you think about tobacco advertising, you take this shredded leaf wrapped in paper, and if you're tired, you smoke it, it'll perk you up. If you're anxious and you smoke it, it'll calm you down. It's just an example of elasticity of meaning. So throughout tobacco advertising, there's this elasticity of meaning where they will make it all things to all people, right? You want it when you wake up, when you go to bed, when you work. So tobacco products became something used all day long. So e-cigarette products will give you energy or they'll calm you down, just in the same way. All from the playbook of tobacco. They claim they don't target teens. If you go to the e-cigarette websites, you get these, but if you want, you just click, you can be 12, you press the green button, you go right on through. Blue, which was owned by Lorillard and now Imperial, a British firm, claims it does not market to young people. These are Enjoy, again claiming they only market to adults. These are Blue UK. Some of them, they would never claim they market to teenagers, but they'll attribute that parents are buying them for their teenagers, right? Well, what do you think that means? Free samples, would you take samples from these guys? This is actually at a LGBT event. How about e-cigarettes with cookies? So cartoon characters, as we saw, were banned after Joe Camel in the late 80s, but they're back in e-cigarettes. And there are even video games for White Cloud. You throw the dwarf into the pool, and if you throw the dwarf even further, you get more points towards free e-cigarettes. So as I mentioned, price matters a lot because today's teenagers need money to go to the movies, buy snacks, get gas, etc. And it's expensive to buy cigarettes. So they actually advertise that it's cheaper by switching to vaping. And that's one of the ways they go after kids. There are back-to-school sales, if you believe it. This was San Jose. We have one of these, I don't know how you pronounce it, Elements. Back-to-school sales. And here is a local store with Eon Smoke and student discounts. Now, we all know sex sells. If any of you were here last time, you remember these slides, no doubt. But here you have a sex stimulant, e-cigarette, believe it or not. The Playboy puts out its own branded e-cigarette and in fact sells them with playmates visiting college campuses around the country. Again, owned by a major tobacco company, published this in magazines aimed at young men, presumably. You get this horrible online humor. I've had sex with a ton of women, well, only 10, but they're all over 200 pounds. I mean, this is the basest stuff. I don't know if any of you remember this. I don't remember if I showed this, but one thing I would do is ask people to interpret what the heck this is saying. And it's whatever it isn't good. Now, some of you with an imagination see an erotic theme here. I'll leave it at that. If you don't, you're in the wrong field. You may not realize that, in fact, sexual themes are very common. If you ever took a close look at Joe Camel's face, you'd see an anatomically correct male genitalia. And that's by design, where a man belongs. These tests were found yesterday. They're very enterprising. So this is the next target that we have, and our studies are very much focusing on this now, are the use of flavors. Now, there are sugary flavors in every kind of candy you can imagine, cotton candy, cookies. You know, I was on a radio show a year ago, and a vape store owner, sounded like an older guy, said, I love the cotton candy type, it's my favorite. And he said, you know, why would that not be a good thing for adults wanting to quit? And I said, it's not a matter of there's an occasional adult who likes chocolate or candy-flavored e-cigarettes, but they are of differential attraction to young people who are not nicotine addicted. And he said, no, that's not true. I said, walk in the cereal aisle in Safeway and see where the Fruit Loops and Cocoa Krispies are, and see where the less sugary ones are, and you realize where the market is. If e-cigarettes, sweetened e-cigarettes, are not aimed at kids, it's a complete exception to every foodstuff out there. So banana split, these are donut flavored ones. Coffee flavored, again, e-liquid beer where you can break those two adult taboos. Bacon flavored, rattlesnake flavored, milk flavored, right? Even milk. Now this is my favorite. They love unicorns, so you have unicorn blood, unicorn puke, unicorn tears, unicorn milk, whoops, sorry. We have unicorn juice, unicorn poop, and we've now found several, unicorn killer. They love unicorns. Yeah. And you can make these yourself. So many of these companies make them in a bathtub, right? This is a YouTube video on how to make your own. Any aspergillus folks? I mean, you're breathing that deep into your lungs. So it turns out that what the industry has done, and I'm going to stop soon because it's getting to time, but they went to the flavored catalogs. It turns out there are these companies that sell flavors that go in foods. And they're mostly aldehydes, ketones, or natural extracts. They are known to be reasonably safe when taken by ingestion in the GI tract. but the spectrum of toxicity in the lung is totally different. And in fact, the flavor manufacturing workplace is a very dangerous place for the workers because aerosolized flavor compounds actually can damage the lungs. And so you actually have to use rebreathing masks and things like this. So now we're sticking these flavors in e-cigarettes that kids are using all day long. This is not a good thing. And in fact, some of you may have heard about popcorn lung due to diacetyl compounds. And enterprising e-cigarette companies are actually now coming out with diacetyl-safe vapor products, in theory, because they're safer. So I will leave you with that. There's a whole lot more to this, but given the time, it's more than enough, and I thank you for listening. So for any of you interested in any projects relating to this, there are many projects. We've got a great team over the summer. We'll have a really talented group of interns who are graduate students and undergrads at Stanford, a wonderful group of folks. There are many otolaryngology relevant topics, and then there are many that aren't, that are just interesting. They're often very easy projects to do because we have a unique resource. You know, if you just take baseball, you probably have 500 different baseball ads. And the story hasn't been told about a lot of these things. And they're very interesting to people by and large. And you can make a difference. I've probably made a bigger difference to public health in this than I've ever done in otology. That's why it drives me forward. So thank you.